first off, we're going to talk about the diver. So, let's see here. I'm going to throw a link up in chat for you guys, so you can take a look. This is the link to the Atmistique website, which is their Greek site. No, it's not Holy Diver. This is not made by Dio, sadly. May he rest in peace. This is the diver rebuildable. I almost want to call it a rebuildable cartomizer because it's almost what it is, but it is still an atomizer. It doesn't have the cartridge filler, but it functions in a similar way to a carto. So the diver is a rebuildable atomizer that is the same size as a 510D cartomizer. So it is ideal for use in tanks, and it is designed to be used in tanks. And there are a lot of really nice tanks out there, and for someone that's maybe looking to make a switch from carto tank use to rebuildables, this could be a good transition, especially if you've spent a lot of money on higher end carto tanks, like some of the nice Greek ones, like the trap tank. There's a lot of good ones out there. Some of the beautiful stuff you can get from Bedazzle. There's tons and tons of high-end tank vendors. So if you spent a lot of money on those and want to jump into rebuildables, this could be a good way to do that. It has some similarities to the Killer. It's a lot more simple than the Killer, and I found it easier to work with than the Killer. It doesn't have the adjustable juice flow like the Killer does, but it also will fit in all devices, whereas the Killer does not. For example, you can't use the Killer in a billet box, but you can use the diver in a billet box. I'll get into how in a little bit. But so the design apparently was based on an idea from back in 2011 that they waited on for a couple years to release, and made some tweaks to it. And they had 6 different variations before they came up with the final design, varying ceramic sizes, hole sizes, tube structure, and this was the final design. So it's 304 stainless, except for the brass center pin, and it's basically just essentially 4 parts. It's really simple, and I'll show you when I disassemble this guy. So first I just want to mention, first thing I want to do is mention the cost. So it's also a lot less expensive than the Killer. It's only 36 euro, so it's around 50 bucks, and the Killer is more than that. Actually, it's not a lot less expensive, but it is less expensive than the Killer. So it's right around 50 bucks. It's a good price to get into a high quality rebuildable atomizer, especially, like I mentioned, if you're in this situation where you've got all of these tanks sitting around. It is pretty readily available too. They're in stock. It comes with an extra ceramic, so you can see here. It comes in a nice little pouch as well. This is the little pouch that it comes in. It's got the Atmistique logo on the front there, and the device itself. It's pretty much what you get. Now here's one thing I want to mention before we go any further. I did modify the device. I didn't modify it in any way that will affect the performance of the device, but if you're going to get a billet box and you want to get a diver for the billet box, you will have to sand down the length of this device. You're going to have to sand the top down about about 1/8 of an inch. So I guess around 1.5 to 2 millimeters to get it to fit properly in the billet box. It does not fit otherwise, and it's not that it doesn't fit in the tank, it doesn't fit in horizontally. You can't actually push the atomizer into the housing on the inside of the billet box. It'll fit fine in the tank, but you can't pop it in. So just keep that in mind if you're looking to get a billet box diver setup, which seems to be very popular because, you know, the billet box is kind of a hot item right now in kind of the rebuildable community, and this is the only way that you can actually make it a rebuildable, is by using it with the diver. So let's pop this guy open so you can see what this looks like. So basically you have this whole unit unscrews right here just below the juice feed hole there. So you know what, I'm gonna take off autofocus again. Hold on a second. We'll do all this. We'll do this all close up. Alright, so you have the device here. You can see there's the juice feed hole, and we'll unscrew this and show you what it looks like underneath. Now I played around with a few different setups. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So it's nice and snug. Get this unscrewed here. There we go. So alright, so I set it up a little bit differently than I saw you know, the recommended setup on the tutorial. What I did was I did a double wick, as you can see, and I have wick that goes down the side. You're supposed to cut the wick to just above where the threading is, and when that's pushed down, that's about right. But what I did was I left the top two pieces long so that they would feed up inside the tube a little bit, and what that'll do is it'll allow the wick to hold more juice. So if you take a longer drag, it's not going to dry out, and I found that to work pretty well. I did have to do a little bit of tweaking with it to get it to work just the way that I wanted to, but I don't know, I guess I would call it a little bit finicky, but it's not too bad. I didn't have as many issues getting it set up as the killer, or getting it working properly as I did with the killer. So basically, you know, it's pretty simple. You have you've got the ceramic cup here, you've got your little, I've got my little coil that I built in there, and the resistance wire obviously makes up the coil, and this is one of those devices where you need to, let me stop myself. So supposedly you can set it up without using non-resistance wire. However, they recommend using non-resistance wire, so I set it up with non-resistance wire because I always want to make sure that I use the device as it's intended. So basically you have the legs going through two tiny holes that are in the bottom of the ceramic. One of those legs kind of folds under the bottom of the ceramic, and then you push this center pin that you see here, this brass piece. That's actually a long brass post. You push that in, and what it does is it pushes the positive leg, and it doesn't matter which side you use, both sides are the same. You push that in, and it actually pushes it up the center of the ceramic a little bit. And then the other one, the other wire you just let hang out, and when you push the ceramic into the base here, it'll come out on the side, and you might actually be able to see it. You can see it if you look really close. You can see a little speck of wire just below that wick, right there. I don't know if you can see that. But anyway, that's the top of the negative. So I trimmed it off right at the threading at the top there. And it's really not that difficult to set up. It didn't take me long to set it up. It did take me a few tries to get it set up properly. One of the things that I found, and actually a friend of mine mentioned this to me, is if you set it up and have the wick a little bit too far, or have the wick and coil a little bit too far down so that it's touching the top of the positive post, which also serves as airflow. As you can see, there's a hole in the bottom of the positive post there. It will leak down the center of the airflow because it's in contact with the. I'm going to take this off. Hold on. There we go. So it'll leak down the center of the positive post because it's in contact with the bottom of the wick, and it's directly in contact with juice, and it kind of wicks down into that hole. So you need to kind of need to kind of lift up the coil a little bit so it's not touching that positive post. The other thing that you need to do when you set it up is you need to make sure, and what they recommend doing is before you put the assembled wick and coil and ceramic in there, you want to screw this down all the way, and you want to mark off where the feed hole is. Once it's screwed down all the way, you want to mark off where that lines up on the base, and then what you want to do is you want to put the ceramic in so that the wicks are perpendicular to the wick hole. You don't want the wicks to line up with the feed hole on the side of the body, because if you do, it'll cause it to flood. So you actually want that to be lined up with like you want it to end up like this, basically, where you have the wicks perpendicular to it. But then putting it together is really simple. You just, I have the long wicks set up on there, but basically you just, trim the wicks down so that they're trimmed down to right where the threading is, and then, screw it in, and you're done. And that's it. That's your assembled unit, and then you slide it into your tank, and you're good to go. Now I have a second one that's in this device already. I have one in here inside the billet box, as you can see. That is a diver in there. So as far as the ease of setup goes, I did find it easier to set up than the killer. It sounds like a pain in the butt, but it actually wasn't that bad. I will say this though, I did have a couple issues with it flooding. I know that it was because of my setup, like I said, where you have to lift the wick and coil up a little bit so it's not touching that positive post. You also have to make sure that it's assembled nice and snug and tight. If everything's not pushed down, then it will, potentially flood as well. But, once I got it set up and working properly, it's a good vape. Now, let's talk a little bit about the quality of the vape that I get from it. So, I have a 1.4 ohm coil on this, and I'm running it at 4.5 volts on the billet box. And let me just show you the vapor production here. It's very good. The vapor production is very good. One thing I did notice, or one thing I do notice, is you can't take a real long drag on it because it doesn't wick fast enough through the feed hole to keep up with the keeping the wick wet on the inside. That was one of the reasons why I did those two long legs on the wick, so it holds a little bit extra juice in between puffs. It has more juice inside. This is, I'm actually not sure what this is. This is Frankenvape from the standard. Whatever the standard VG-PG ratio is for that, I actually don't know what it is. So, yeah. It's a little finicky, but you do get a quality vape from it, even though you can't take the long drags. So, all right, it's a good clean taste. I don't taste the silica, which is an issue that I've had on other silica devices. The vapor production is very good. The flavor is very good. The flavor is very clean. The only issue that I have is the finickiness of the setup and the fact that you can't, if you want to take a long drag, you can't. Yeah, I also notice you can't chain vape for the same reason. It needs a little bit of time to kind of refeed. if you don't want to take a primer puff. The other way that you can do it is, you take a drag, and then take a couple puffs to feed some juice in, and then take another drag. So that is that is another downside to it. So overall, just to kind of sum it up, I like the device. I think it's a really good idea. It performs well for what it is, but it has limitations because of the size of the device and because of the way that it's made and the way that you construct the wick. There's not a lot of wick material in there, so you're not going to be able to take a super long drag because it's not going to keep up. I mean, if you really want, you can try fiddling around with it and bore out the feed hole, and I mean, I didn't personally. I like to use devices stock. I know I did say I had to modify this. I just sanded the top down, which doesn't change the performance at all. But I don't like to modify the way a device performs before I review it. Overall, I would give it a thumbs up. I think it's not something that I would use regularly personally. However, I do like it better than the Killer. Even though it doesn't have that juice flow control, because I found for some reason with the Killer I just could not get the thing to wick properly no matter how I set it up. Maybe the juice I was using was too thick, I don't know. Maybe it was user error. I feel like I'm pretty good at setting up coils at this point though, and I still was having issues with that. But regardless, this I found easier to set up than the Killer. I find it performs better, and it's also going to fit in more devices. So I do recommend it, especially if you're in a situation like I mentioned earlier where you have a bunch of nice cardo tanks. You're looking to get into rebuildables. You don't want to sell off your cardo tanks and start buying Genesis atomizers or whatever. It's a good, I don't even want to call it a stepping stone, but it's a good step up from for a cardo user to get into rebuildables, and it's not too difficult to set up, especially if you buy pre-made wires, because really the real difficult thing with setting these up is actually doing the wire joining, which can be a pain to get the hang of. I ran Penelopes for a long time, so I've got it down pat. But I know, I remember in the very beginning it was a pain in the butt to get used to that. Although now they have wire joining tools that you can use to do it for you, so you could just pick one of those up too. So, summary. I like the Diver. It's not my favorite device. I would recommend it, especially for people that are looking to take a step up, that are cardo tank users and looking for something to put in a cardo tank. So, or for someone that's looking to get a billet box and wants to have a rebuildable setup for the billet box. So, there you have it. That is the Diver.